The shackles clicked shut, a sound louder than the wailing sirens in the humid Georgia air. Deputy Bo Miller thought he'd caught a career criminal, a black man driving a luxury SUV through Oak Haven County with a sharp tongue. He didn't know the man in the back seat wasn't a drug dealer. He was Lieutenant General Daniel J. Washington, a 3-star general who oversaw logistics for half the East Coast. Miller smirked as he tossed the general's phone onto the dashboard, oblivious to the fact that a single missed protocol was about to trigger a call to the Pentagon that would unravel his entire department. Karma wasn't coming. It was already here. The mid-July heat in Oak Haven County, Georgia, was a physical weight that pressed against the asphalt until it glistened in a mirage of oil and moisture. It was the kind of heat that short-circuited tempers and patience. For Lieutenant General Daniel J. Washington, however, the heat was nothing. He had endured the scorching sands of Kuwait, the humid jungles of the Pacific during joint training exercises, and the stifling pressure of the Pentagon's conference rooms. This was a casual drive in his civilian silver Mercedes wagon along Route 27. It was supposed to be his decompression. Daniel was a man of precise habits. At 58, his hair was beginning to gray at the temples, cut close in the military style that hadn't changed since his cadet days at West Point. He wore an impeccable navy polo shirt and khaki trousers. Today there were no medals on his chest, no stars on his shoulders, only the quiet confidence of a man who commanded 40,000 troops and managed a budget larger than the GDP of some small nations. He was heading to Fort Benning to surprise his son Marcus, who was graduating from paratrooper school the next morning. He checked his speedometer, 54 in a 55 zone. Daniel wasn't breaking the law, he was enforcing it. 2 miles back, sitting in the shade of a leafy oak tree near the old Miller's Creek Bridge, Sheriff's Deputy Bo Miller sat in his patrol car, sweat dripping into his uniform. Bo was 32, with a face that seemed permanently furrowed since high school. He was the kind of cop locals warned outsiders about, the kind who saw his badge not as a shield, but as a hunting license. Bo was bored. The month's quota was low, and Sheriff Clayton was pressuring him for the ticket revenue. He took a sip of lukewarm Mountain Dew and squinted at the radar. Then, the silver wagon glided past. Bo straightened up. A car like that didn't belong here. Not in Oak Haven. That was a $150,000 vehicle. And as it drove past, Bo caught a glimpse of the driver. "Well, well," Bo said to himself, starting his car. "What do we have here?" He didn't see a decorated military officer. He didn't see a father proud of his son. He saw a black man in a car that cost more than Bo would earn in 3 years. In Bo's narrow, prejudiced worldview, that equation had only one solution: narcotics. He shot out onto the freeway, gravel splattering behind his tires. He didn't turn on his lights immediately. He wanted to follow him. He wanted to see the driver sweat. He pulled dangerously close to the Mercedes bumper, aggressively filling the rearview mirror with the grill of his Dodge Charger. Inside the Mercedes, Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw the patrol car's aggressive stance. His combat instincts, honed over 3 decades of service, weren't triggered by fear, but by tactical awareness. Tight-tail intimidation tactic, he thought calmly. Maintain speed. Hold lane. Daniel gently tapped the brakes, just enough to activate the lights, signaling the officer to back off. That was all Bo needed. "Brake an officer hard," Bo grinned, flipping the switch. The red and blue lights flashed, piercing the late afternoon haze. The siren squealed once, an authoritative sound demanding submission. Daniel sighed, a long, weary exhalation. He signaled right, slowed gradually, and pulled over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, making sure he was far enough from the road for safety. He put the car in neutral, rolled down all 4 windows, standard procedure for putting an officer at ease, and placed his large hands on the steering wheel at 2:10. He waited. He watched in the side mirror as Deputy Miller stepped out of the patrol car. The deputy didn't walk. He strutted. His hand was already hovering near his holster, the safety undone. This wasn't an approaching traffic stop. This was an approaching raid. Miller didn't come to the window immediately. He stopped at the taillight, touching it with his thumb, an old superstition for leaving a fingerprint, and then leaned over, peering into the back seat through the tinted glass. He walked slowly, trying to unsettle the driver. When Miller finally reached the window, he didn't say hello. He didn't ask for the license and registration. "Whose car is this, kid?" Miller asked, his voice dripping with a fake, casual Southern accent that barely masked the venom beneath. Daniel turned his head slowly. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly indifferent. He had been questioned by senators, warlords, and presidents. A deputy sheriff with a cigar between his lips wasn't going to unsettle him. "This vehicle belongs to me, officer," Daniel said, his voice a deep baritone, calm and even. "Is there a reason for the stop?" "Did I ask you a question?" Miller snapped, stepping closer, his hand resting on the doorframe. "And as I see it, a car like this doesn't fit the profile. Do you have a receipt for this trip?" "The record's in the glove compartment. My ID's in my pocket." "I'll get it now," Daniel declared, signaling his next move. "Don't move," Miller barked, reaching for his gun. "I didn't tell you to move." Daniel froze. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of a man who had lost control of the situation because he'd never had control of himself. This was dangerous. "Officer," Daniel said, "I'm a lieutenant general in the United States Army. I'll get my military ID. I suggest you lower your voice and state the violation." Miller laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. "A general? You sound more like a messenger from the Atlanta boys. Get out of the car." "I'm not getting out of the vehicle for a traffic violation," Daniel said firmly. "That's not standard procedure." "I decide what the procedure is," Miller shouted. He yanked the door open. "Get out now." Daniel looked at the aide. He saw the sweat on Miller's upper lip, the dilated pupils, the vein throbbing in his neck. He knew that any sudden movement would give this man the excuse he was desperately seeking. Slowly, Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt. He stepped out of the air-conditioned sanctuary of the Mercedes into the sweltering heat. He was a head taller than Deputy Miller. Daniel was 6 feet 3 inches, built like a linebacker who had kept his shape. Miller had to look up, and that only enraged him more. "Turn around. Hands on the hood," Miller ordered. "Am I under arrest?" Daniel asked. "You're being held on suspicion of vehicle theft and resisting a lawful warrant," Miller spat. "Now turn around before I make you turn around." Daniel turned around. He placed his hands on the hot metal of his own car. He felt the deputy's rough hands pat him down harder than necessary, searching his pockets, slapping against his inner thighs. Miller pulled out Daniel's wallet. He didn't look at the ID inside. He just tossed it onto the hood. "Do you have drugs in the car?" Miller asked, moving toward the driver's side door. "I don't consent to a search," Daniel said over his shoulder. Miller paused. He looked at Daniel with pure malice. "I smell marijuana," Miller lied softly. "That gives me probable cause. Stay there and shut up." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. He thought about the phone in his pocket. He needed to make a call. But before he could move, he felt the cold steel of the shackles slap against his right wrist. "You're nervous," Miller said, twisting Daniel's arm behind his back. "I don't like nervous." The sound of the shackles clicking shut sent a shockwave through Daniel's system. It was a violation of dignity that burned hotter than the Georgia sun. This was a man who had sworn allegiance to the Constitution, a man who had led battalions to the jaws of death. And here he was, chained like a common criminal by a man who probably wouldn't pass the Army's basic aptitude test. "Officer," Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deathly calm, "you're making a mistake, a very costly mistake. I advise you to look at the ID you just threw on the hood." "I don't need to look at fake IDs," Bo Miller snarled, shoving Daniel toward the patrol car. "You can tell your story to the judge on Monday. Until then, you're our guest." "Monday?" Daniel tensed, planting his feet. "This is Friday afternoon. Are you trying to hold me without charges over the weekend?" "Resisting arrest is a charge," Miller said, shoving Daniel again. Daniel didn't stumble, but he let himself be moved. A physical struggle would be a death sentence. He knew the statistics. He knew how this story would end if he resisted. He had to fight this with the weight of the institution he served. Miller opened the charge's rear door and shoved Daniel's head down roughly, too roughly. Daniel's temple grazed the doorframe, a sharp sting of pain. "Watch your head," Daniel snapped. "Watch your mouth," Miller retorted, slamming the door shut. The back of the patrol car reeked of stale vomit and industrial disinfectant. The partition was a wire cage. Daniel sat awkwardly, his hands numb behind his back. He stared out the window as Miller walked back to the Mercedes. The deputy didn't just search the car, he wrecked it. Daniel watched with seething rage as Miller threw his duffel bag onto the asphalt. His dress uniform, neatly packed in a bag for the graduation ceremony, was tossed onto the dusty shoulder. Miller opened the glove compartment, scattering papers. He was looking for a gun or a brick of cocaine, anything to justify the stop. Finding nothing in the front, Miller moved to the trunk. He pulled out a sealed, rigid box. "Open the trunk!" Miller yelled through the window, realizing he couldn't hear Daniel. He returned to the patrol car and opened the driver's side door, peering inside. "What's in the box?" "Guns." "It's government property," Daniel said. "It contains classified logistical data on an encrypted drive. You're not authorized to touch it, let alone open it." Miller's eyes lit up. "Classified, huh? Sounds like traffic." "If you try to force that box," Daniel said, glancing at the aide in the rearview mirror, "you'll be violating the Homeland Security Act. Don't touch it." Miller scoffed. "I am the law here, General. I can touch whatever I want." Miller returned to the Mercedes. He grabbed his baton and snapped the lock on the hard case. Daniel shuddered, not from fear, but from disbelief. The case contained sensitive troop movement schedules for the East Coast. It was encrypted, yes, but physical tampering with it was a serious federal crime. Miller pulled out a laptop and a stack of files stamped top secret. He walked right through them, not understanding a word of the logistical jargon, then tossed them onto the passenger seat of his patrol car like old newspapers. Then Miller found the phone. Daniel's personal phone was on the center console. Miller picked it up. "Let's see who you're calling," Miller muttered. He saw the photo in the background. Daniel shaking hands with the President of the United States. For a second, Miller paused. The photo looked real. The President looked familiar. But cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug. Miller convinced himself it was photoshopped. "These guys fake everything," he thought. "Fake IDs, fake photos, everything." He walked back to the patrol car, tossing the phone onto the dashboard out of Daniel's reach. "You've got a call when we get to the station," Miller said, starting the car. "If the phones are working." "I need my phone now," Daniel said. "I'm required to report my status to my command." "You're not in command of anything right now," Miller said, speeding off onto the road. He left the Mercedes on the side of the road, doors unlocked, trunk open, hazard lights off. "You're leaving my vehicle unsecured," Daniel demanded. "There's sensitive government property in there." "The tow trucks will come," Miller said dismissively, "if it's still there when they get here." As the patrol car drove off to the county jail, Daniel closed his eyes and began to breathe rhythmically. Square breathing. 4 seconds inhale, 4 hold, 4 exhale, 4 hold. He needed to slow his heart rate. He needed to think. He was in a dead zone. The local sheriff, a man named Clayton, ran this county like a crook. Daniel knew the type. If he went into that jail, he'd be processed, stripped, and thrown into a cell. He'd miss his son's graduation. But worse, the data on his laptop was now compromised by a breach of chain of custody. He glanced at the dashboard. His phone was sliding as Miller took corners too fast. It wasn't locked. "Aide Miller," Daniel said, "I want you to listen very carefully. My name is Lieutenant General Daniel Washington. I report directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you take me to that jail, you'll set off a chain of events you won't be able to stop. I'm giving you one chance to pull over, properly verify my ID, and sort this out." Miller laughed. "You guys always have a story. I know the mayor. I know the judge. You know the Joint Chiefs of Staff?" "Of course. And tonight I'm having dinner with Elvis." "This is your final warning," Daniel said. Miller turned up the radio. Country music blasted, drowning out the general's voice. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department. It was a low brick building with barred windows. Miller dragged Daniel out of the car, parading him in front of 2 other deputies who were smoking outside. "Look what I caught," Miller boasted. "He claims to be a general driving a G-Wagon, probably stole it from some rapper in Atlanta." The other deputies laughed. "A general? Did he salute you, Bucky?" "He's going to learn to salute," Miller said, pushing Daniel through the heavy steel doors. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of stale coffee. The search sergeant, an older woman named Mabel, with tired eyes, looked up. She saw Daniel standing dignified, despite the shackles, his eyes scanning the room with tactical precision. She saw the quality of his clothing. She saw the way he carried himself. And she saw something Miller didn't see. The West Point ring on Daniel's finger. "Bo," Mabel said, her voice faltering, "what have you got here?" "Vehicle theft, resisting arrest, suspected trafficking," Miller listed. "Search him." "Name?" Mabel asked Daniel. "Lieutenant General Daniel J. Washington," Daniel said clearly. "Service number 04492 Bravo. I demand my right to contact the Department of Defense immediately." Mabel typed the name into the computer. Her eyes widened. The screen flashed a red banner. DODVIP Level 5 Clearance. Do not disturb. "B," Mabel whispered, her face draining of color. "Bo, come see this." "I don't need to see it," Miller said, unbuckling his belt. "Bo, you idiot. The computer says it's real. It says it's—" Miller frowned. He walked around the desk and looked at the screen. He saw the photo in the file. It was the man standing in front of him, but in full dress uniform with 3 stars on each shoulder and a chest covered in medals. Miller's stomach sank, but his pride was a heavy anchor. "System failure," Miller muttered. "Hackers, they can hack anything these days." "I want my phone," Daniel said. "Now." Miller looked at Daniel. He looked at the computer. He had 2 options: apologize and pray for mercy, or double down and hope he could find something, anything, to make the charges stick. Miller doubled down. "Put him in the holding cell," Miller ordered. "I'm going to search that laptop. If he's a general, why does he have encrypted files he doesn't want me to see?" "Bo, you can't touch that laptop," Mabel yelled. "Look at me." Miller grabbed the laptop bag he'd brought and stormed off to the back office. Daniel turned to Mabel. "Ma'am, you seem like a sensible woman. Give me a phone. If you break the encryption on that unit, Federal agents will be here in an hour, and they won't be knocking." Mabel glared at the furious aide, disappearing down the hall, then at the general. She reached under the desk, pulled out the desk phone, and slid it across the counter. "Make it quick," she whispered. Daniel picked up the receiver. He didn't dial 911. He didn't call a lawyer. He dialed a number that bypassed switchboards, a number that rang on a desk in a 5-sided building in Arlington, Virginia. Pentagon Command Center. A clear voice answered. "Major Reynolds speaking." "Major," Daniel said, his voice calm but icy. "This is Lieutenant General Washington, Code Black. I'm being illegally detained by local law enforcement in Oak Haven County, Georgia. Secure materials compromised. I need you to connect me to General Mattis's office and get the JAG teams online. We have a situation." "Yes, General. Locating your position now. Hold." Daniel glanced at the camera in the corner of the log room. Karma, he thought, is about to arrive in a Black Hawk helicopter. 400 miles away, in the suburbs of the Pentagon, the atmosphere at the National Military Command Center, MCC, shifted from routine monitoring to crisis mode in the span of 3 seconds. Major Reynolds, a sharp-eyed officer who oversaw domestic logistics for senior personnel, stared at his screen. The flashing red light wasn't a mistake. It was a beacon. "I have a code Black," Reynolds announced, his voice cutting through the hum of the servers and the hushed conversations. "Lieutenant General Washington's beacon has been activated. Location, Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department, Georgia. Status, detained." The room fell silent. General Washington wasn't just a logistics officer. He was one of the architects of the current East Coast defense strategy. He possessed clearance levels that exceeded those of most senators. His laptop held the keys to the kingdom regarding the movement of nuclear-capable assets along the Atlantic coast. "Detained," growled Colonel Baxter, Reynolds' superior, approaching, his coffee forgotten. "By whom? FBI? Homeland Security?" "Negative, sir," Reynolds typed frantically. "Local law enforcement, Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department. And, sir, your secure laptop's transponder just registered a tamper event. Someone is trying to force the casing." Colonel Baxter's face went pale, then red. "Get General Harrison on the line, get the JAG teams, and get me the commander of the military police at Fort Benning. That's only 40 miles from Oak Haven. Tell them we have a hostage situation involving a high-value asset." "Hostage situation, sir?" "If some local hick is hacking into a top-secret unit," Baxter snarled, "that's a national security compromise. Deploy the Rapid Reaction Force." Back at Oak Haven, the station's air conditioner rattled, but it did nothing to cool the rising temperature in the room. Sheriff Clayton, Big Clay, Higgins walked through the front door, shaking the rain off his hat. A storm was brewing, darkening the Georgia sky. Clayton was a huge man in his 60s with a history of heart problems and the desire for a quiet retirement. He ran his county with a mixture of corruption and laziness, but he knew where the lines were. He saw the silver wagon parked awkwardly in the impound lot, its doors still open, rain beginning to soak the expensive leather. He frowned. Inside he saw Mabel, the registration sergeant, pale and shivering behind the glass. He watched Deputy Bo Miller sitting at his desk with a screwdriver and hammer, trying to force open a reinforced, rigid black box. He also saw the man in the holding cell. Clayton stopped. He knew people. He knew authority. And the man sitting on the metal bench in the cell, staring at the wall with meditative calm, radiated more authority than anyone Clayton had ever met. B. "Clayton," he said, his voice deep and booming, "what are you doing with that screwdriver?" "Chief," Miller looked up, smiling, "I caught a big one. A drug dealer driving that fancy car outside. A fake ID says he's a general. I'm just trying to get into his stash, probably full of cash or product. Clayton walked to the desk. He picked up the ID Miller had tossed aside. He looked at the hologram. He felt the weight of the card. He looked at the name. Lieutenant General Daniel J. Washington. Clayton's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the laptop case Miller was scratching. It had a sticker on the bottom. Property of the U.S. government. Penalty for unauthorized use. 20 years in prison. B. Clayton, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Did you run him down? Mabel did. The computers malfunctioned. He said he was a VIP. Miller scoffed. Computers make mistakes. Clayton looked at Mabel. She shook her head frantically, mouthing the word real. Clayton walked slowly toward the holding cell. He grasped the bars. Excuse me, Clayton said. Daniel turned his head slowly. Sheriff, I assume you're the senior officer here. I am, Clayton said. Clayton Higgins. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Daniel said. Your deputy arrested me without cause, assaulted me, denied me legal assistance, and is currently committing a federal crime by attempting to violate classified government property. I made a call 5 minutes ago. If I were you, I'd open this door. He's lying, Clay, Miller yelled from the desk. Don't let him out. He's a con man. Clayton looked at Daniel. He saw the West Point ring. He saw the posture. B. Clayton, he barked. Put the screwdriver down, but put it down, Clayton roared. Suddenly the phone on Mabel's desk rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound. Mabel picked it up. Sheriff of Oak Haven. She stopped. Her eyes widened. She handed the phone to Clayton. It's the governor. Clayton stared at the phone. The governor of Georgia? Yes, and he's yelling. Clayton took the phone. Hello, Higgins. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. What the hell is going on down there? I just got a call from the Secretary of Defense. Do you have General Daniel Washington in a cage? Clayton felt the blood drain from his legs. Governor, my deputy... I don't care about your deputy. The Secretary of Defense told me that if that general isn't released in 5 minutes, they're going to designate your sheriff's department a hostile entity. Do you know what that means, Higgins? It means the army is coming. Fix this now. The line cut out. Clayton dropped the phone. He looked at Miller. Get him out, Clayton whispered. What? Miller asked. Get him out now, Clayton yelled, his face turning purple. And give him his damn computer. Deputy Miller moved sullenly, confused and angry. He didn't understand why everyone was panicking. So the guy had friends. So what? He was still a suspect in Miller's eyes. Miller grabbed the keys and walked to the cell. He put the key in the lock and turned it. You're a lucky guy, Miller hissed as the door opened. The sheriff doesn't have the guts, but I'm keeping an eye on you. Daniel stood up. He straightened his polo shirt. He stepped out of the cell, facing Miller. He said nothing to the deputy. He walked straight to Sheriff Clayton. My property, Daniel said. Clayton hurried to the desk. He grabbed the laptop, wallet, and phone. He handed them to Daniel with trembling hands. General, Clayton stammered, I'm sorry. Deputy Miller is young. He's too jealous. We can drop all charges. You can go. No damage, right? Daniel examined the laptop case. The lock was smashed, the plastic casing deeply scratched. He looked at the phone. He looked at Clayton. No damage, Daniel repeated. Sheriff, the damage is that a secure device containing national defense protocols has been tampered with by an unsecured civilian. That's a violation. The damage is that a U.S. general officer was kidnapped. Kidnapped, Miller scoffed. Arrested. Unlawful detention is kidnapping, Daniel said. and the U.S. military doesn't negotiate with kidnappers." Daniel looked at his watch. "They should be here." "Who?" Clayton asked, sweat dripping down his face. The answer didn't come in words but in sound. It began as a low hum, rattling the coffee and cups on the desks. Then it grew into a rhythmic whump, whump that rattled the window panes in their frames. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a formation. Then came the roar of engines on the highway. "What's that?" Mabel whispered. Daniel walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. "That, my friend, is the 75th Ranger Regiment and the Fort Benning Military Police." Outside, the scene was apocalyptic for a small-town sheriff's department. 2 Black Hawk helicopters swooped down over the power lines, the current from their rotors kicking up a blinding cloud of dust and rain. They loomed aggressively over the parking lot, snipers clearly visible in the side doors, their rifles pointed at the sheriff's building. Simultaneously, 3 Humvees and a black tactical SUV screeched into the parking lot, blocking the exit. Heavily armed soldiers in full tactical gear rushed out of the vehicles. They didn't move like cops. They moved like predators. Precise, fast, terrifying. "Oh my God," Miller whispered, his arrogance finally shattered. The station's front door didn't open. It was kicked open. 6 soldiers burst in, rifles raised, tactical lights sweeping the room. "Hands!" the lead soldier yelled. "Show me your hands now! Now! Now!" Sheriff Clayton threw his hands up so fast he nearly dislocated his shoulder. Mabel dove under her desk. Deputy Miller, stunned, instinctively reached for his belt, not to draw his weapon, but out of nervous habit. "Don't do it!" roared a trooper. 2 red laser dots instantly appeared on Miller's chest. "I'm a cop!" Miller yelled, freezing. "You're a threat!" shouted the trooper. "On the ground! Face down! Hands behind your head!" A tall, broad-shouldered colonel in fatigues entered behind the troopers. He scanned the room, ignoring the terrified local deputies. His eyes fell on Daniel. The colonel snapped to attention and saluted. "General Washington, Colonel Vance, 3rd MP Brigade. Are you wounded, sir?" Daniel returned the salute slowly. "I'm not wounded, Colonel, but we have a serious situation regarding the safety of my team." Daniel pointed to Bo Miller, who was now being restrained with zip ties by 2 soldiers on the linoleum floor. "That man," Daniel said, his voice ringing with purpose, "tried to access the encrypted unit after being warned of its classification. He also assaulted a senior officer." Colonel Vance turned to Miller. The expression on the colonel's face was one of pure revulsion. "Sheriff," Colonel Vance said to Clayton, who was trembling against the wall, "I'm assuming jurisdiction of this scene under the Homeland Security Act. Your deputy isn't going to the county jail. He's coming with us." "With you?" Clayton squealed. "Where?" "Federal custody," Vance said. "Leavenworth has a holding cell for domestic terrorists and those who compromise national security. We'll settle this there." Miller began to struggle. "They can't do this. I'm a deputy. Clayton, tell them this is my jurisdiction." Daniel approached Miller. He crouched down, bringing his face close to the deputy's ear. "You asked for a receipt for my car," Daniel whispered. "You asked who I knew." "Well, deputy, I know the people who write the laws you were supposed to enforce, and you're about to learn that the badge on your chest is just a piece of brass compared to the oath I took." "Get him out of here," Vance ordered. As the troopers dragged a screaming Bo Miller out into the rain toward the waiting Humvees, Daniel stood and turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Higgins," Daniel said calmly, "I suggest you call your attorney. The Justice Department is doing a full audit of your department's traffic stops and arrests over the last 10 years. If there's a pattern of profiling, and I suspect there is, it will implicate your deputy." Daniel picked up his battered laptop case. "Colonel," Daniel said, "I have a graduation to attend. My son David is becoming a paratrooper tomorrow. I wouldn't want to be late." "Sir," Colonel Vance said, "we've secured your vehicle, but frankly, sir, the G-Wagon is compromised. We can't let you drive it until it's inspected for microphones. We have a transport ready for you." "Very well," Daniel said. He left the station, flanked by the colonel. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp. Troopers saluted as he passed. Sheriff Clayton slid down the wall, sitting on the ground, listening to the sound of his run ending as the convoy roared past. The morning sun over Fort Benning was markedly different from the damp mist of the roadside stop the day before. It was crisp, golden, and illuminated the manicured parade grounds where 500 soldiers stood in perfect formation. Lieutenant General Daniel J. Washington sat in the VIP box, his full-dress uniform immaculate, his chest adorned with a row of decorations that told the story of 30 years of service. To his right was the base commander, Major General Harrison. To his left, an empty chair where his wife would have sat had she not died 3 years earlier. Daniel surveyed the field through dark aviator sunglasses. Today he wasn't looking at the formation like a commander. He was searching for a face. In the third row, standing stiffly at attention, was Private First Class David Washington. David didn't know that his father had spent the night in a safe house, questioning federal agents. He didn't know that his father had been handcuffed and humiliated less than 24 hours earlier. All David saw was his father's imposing figure at the podium, a silent pillar of strength. "Impressive group, Daniel," General Harrison whispered. "Your boy looks great." "He's a good soldier," Daniel replied quietly. "Better than I was at that age." "I heard about the incident," Harrison said, lowering his voice. "The Navy lawyers are having a field day. They're calling it Operation Clean Sweep." "Apparently, they found more than just bad attitude in that sheriff's department." Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "It wasn't an incident, Tom. It was a symptom, and we're the cure." As the ceremony concluded, and the order to dismiss sounded, the formation broke into a sea of berets and camouflage. Daniel descended the steps, the crowd parting respectfully. He found David near the barracks. The young soldier saluted, but Daniel embraced him. For a moment the general was just a father. "Proud of you, son," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Thanks, Dad." David smiled, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. "Did you drive the G-Wagon? The boys were dying to see it." Daniel paused. He thought of the silver SUV that was currently being dismantled by forensic experts at an FBI storage facility to ensure no tracking devices had been planted. "Not today, son," Daniel lied gently. "I had to take government transportation, logistical issues." While Daniel celebrated, Deputy Bo Miller was experiencing a very different kind of mourning. He wasn't in the familiar, comfortable holding cell at Oak Haven, where he used to taunt the prisoners. He was in a federal detention center in Atlanta, in solitary confinement. The cell was white, sterile, and eerily quiet. They had taken away his uniform, his badge, and his name. He was now inmate 4920. The door rattled and clicked open. Miller jumped. He was expecting his lawyer. He was expecting Sheriff Clayton to come and whisk him away with a flick of the wrist. Instead, 2 men in dark suits walked in. One was black, the other white. Neither looked in the mood for jokes. "I want my lawyer," Miller croaked. His throat was dry. He hadn't had water in hours. "You'll get your lawyer when we prosecute you," the black agent said, pulling out a metal chair and sitting with his back to Miller. "I'm Special Agent King, FBI Civil Rights Division. This is Agent Peretti." "Civil rights," Miller scoffed, trying to muster a shred of his old bravado. "I made a traffic stop. Maybe I went a little too far. That's a procedural error, not a federal case." Agent King smiled, but it didn't reach Miller's eyes. He tossed a file onto the small metal table. It landed with a heavy thud. Look, that's where you're wrong, Bo. We recovered the dashcam footage not just from yesterday but from the last 6 months. We recovered the deleted files from the server that Sheriff Clayton tried to erase this morning. Miller felt a cold rush of adrenaline in his gut. I don't know what you're talking about. We saw the stop with the Florida college student last month, Agent Peretti said, leaning against the wall. The one where you found a bag of meth in his back seat after you peeked in. We have video of that bag in your hand before you reached into the car. Miller paled. That's planting evidence, B. King said gently. That's a serious crime. But yesterday, you kidnapped a 3-star general. Do you know what the penalty is for kidnapping a high-ranking government official during a heightened national alert? Miller shook his head, speechless. It's under the Patriot Act, King said, dropping the bombshell. You're not going to face unemployment, Bo. You're going to face 20 years to life in a federal supermax prison. You're going to be in a cage with the very people you framed. Miller began to hyperventilate. The reality of karma hit him like a freight train. The badge was gone. The protection was gone. He was just a man who had bullied the wrong person. I was just following orders, Miller whispered, the oldest excuse in the book. Sheriff Clayton, he told us to increase revenue. He said, attack the outsiders. He said, oh, King interrupted. Now we're getting somewhere. You want to talk about Clayton because right now Clayton is in the next room and he's talking about you. The downfall of the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department wasn't a slow leak. It was a damn collapse. By Monday morning, the story had broken, but it wasn't just local news. Because General Washington had made that call to the Pentagon, the military involvement made it national headline news. CNN, Fox, and MSNBC were all airing the same supporting footage. The Oak Haven Sheriff's Station surrounded by military Humvees and the shocking image of a handcuffed deputy, Miller, being escorted away by Army Rangers. The headline was simple and devastating. Small-town tyranny. Sheriff's Department dismantled after arresting Army General in Oak Haven. The atmosphere was chaotic. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, embarrassed by the federal intervention, had raided the courthouse. They were seizing everything. Ticket books, evidence, lockers, hard drives, even the sheriff's personal safe. Sheriff Clayton Higgins sat in an interrogation room that looked identical to Miller's. But the person in front of him wasn't an FBI agent. It was Georgia District Attorney Elenina Apprentice. She was a woman known for her political ambition and her utter lack of remorse for embarrassment. Clayton, Apprentice said, adjusting her glasses. You've run this county like a pirate ship for 12 years. We've looked at the books. You've seized over $3 million in cash and cars under civil forfeiture in the last 4 years alone, and 90% of those seized were from minority drivers. It's legal, Clayton said, sweating, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. State law allows the seizure of property suspected of being involved in a crime. Suspected? Apprentice corrected. Not proven. You never charged half of these people. You just took their cars and told them it would cost them more to sue you than the car was worth. That's not law enforcement, Clayton. That's highway robbery. He leaned forward. But here's the twist. General Washington didn't sue you. He activated the Navy's legal corps. The U.S. military is launching a formal investigation into the disruption of national logistics. We're classifying your department as a corrupt organization, which allows us to use RICO statutes. Clayton gasped. RICO was used for the mafia. It meant they could take everything from him, his pension, his house, his boat, his wife's car. I want a deal, Clayton pleaded. I'll give you Miller. It was a loose gun. He set it up. I just signed the paperwork. Miller already gave us on you, Apprentice said coldly. He told us about the quota system. He told us about the bonus you gave deputies for seizing luxury cars. He told us about the safe in your basement. Clayton slumped in his chair. It was over. The Oak Haven rain had fallen. Meanwhile, in a conference room in an Atlanta skyscraper, General Daniel Washington sat at the head of a long mahogany table. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a smart gray suit. Beside him were 3 military lawyers and a private civil rights attorney named Robert Thorne. Across the table sat the Oak Haven County attorneys, looking like deer blinded by headlights. "Gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice calm but filling the room, "my attorneys tell me they're offering a settlement. $2 million and a public apology." The county attorney nodded briskly. "Yes, General. The county is prepared to pay immediately to avoid further litigation. We deeply regret Deputy Miller's actions." Daniel picked up a glass of water, took a sip, and set it down. "Do you think this is about money?" Daniel asked. "I don't need your money. I have a pension, and I have my integrity, neither of which your client seems to possess." "General, that's a very generous offer," the lawyer said. "It's money to buy silence," Daniel said. "Do you want me to sign a confidentiality agreement? Do you want this to go away so you can hire a new sheriff and go back to normal?" Daniel stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Here's my counteroffer," Daniel said, turning to them. "I won't sue for a single penny for myself. However, I will file a class-action lawsuit on behalf of every person Deputy Miller and Sheriff Clayton have unlawfully detained in the last 10 years. My team has already identified 400 victims." The county attorneys dropped their pens. 400 plaintiffs. That would bankrupt the county. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "I want a federal consent decree. I want the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department dissolved and law enforcement functions transferred to the state police until a federally appointed oversight board, which I will help select, can rebuild the department from the ground up." "General, you can't demand that," the attorney protested. That's a takeover." "I'm a general in the United States Army," Daniel said, his eyes as hard as flint. "I specialize in nation building and the dismantling of hostile regimes. You harbored a hostile regime on American soil. Those are my terms. You have 1 hour." Daniel left the courtroom, leaving the lawyers in stunned silence. Outside in the hallway, his son David waited for him. He had been briefed on the magnitude of the situation. "Are you really not taking the money, Dad?" David asked. "You could retire on that." "David," Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder, "there are things more expensive than money. Freedom is one. Dignity is another. If I took that money, I would be selling the dignity of every person that man intimidated on the side of the road. I couldn't look you in the eye if I did that." David smiled. "You're a tough man to beat, Dad." "I didn't beat them, son," Daniel said, glancing at his watch. "The truth, beat them. I just made the call." Back in his cell, Bo Miller sat on his bunk. The reality of his future was becoming palpable. He was going to lose his home. His wife no longer answered his calls. He was facing time in federal prison. And worst of all, deep down, he knew he deserved it. He had spent years believing he was the wolf-hunting sheep. He never stopped to think that one day he might try to bite a lion. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Atlanta was surrounded by a sea of media vans. The trial of United States versus Bo Miller and United States versus Clayton Higgins had become a focal point of controversy in the national debate on police accountability. What had begun as a traffic stop on a dusty Georgia road had become one of the most important civil rights cases of the decade. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was stiflingly tense. Lieutenant General Daniel Washington sat in the front row, his posture as rigid as granite. He wore a dark gray suit, his retired military uniform for the day, though his presence commanded no less respect. Beside him sat his son David, now a private first class with the 82nd Airborne Division, on leave specifically for this moment. In the defendant's chair sat Bo Miller. The swagger was gone. The chewing tobacco was gone. He had lost 30 pounds in pretrial detention. His cheap suit hung loosely on him, and he refused to look at the gallery. He looked small. Sheriff Clayton Higgins sat at the next table. He looked even worse, a man whose entire identity had been stripped away, leaving behind an elderly, terrified shell. The presiding judge, the Honorable Robert Sterling, a man known for his severe sentences in corruption cases, reviewed the papers on his bench. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "Mr. Miller," Judge Sterling said, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls, "you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 3 counts of disenfranchisement under the color of the law, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of violating the Espionage Act by the unauthorized handling of classified military equipment." Miller began to weep. It was a pathetic, gasping sound. "He took an oath," the judge continued, raising his voice. "He was given a gun and a badge to protect the citizens of this county. Instead, he used them as tools of predation. He targeted General Washington not because he had committed a crime, but because he challenged his narrow, prejudiced expectation of who belongs in a luxury car. He saw a black man with power, and he tried to break him." The judge leaned forward. "But he didn't break him, Mr. Miller. He broke himself, and in doing so, he exposed a rot that has festered in Oak Haven for far too long." "Your Honor, please," Miller sobbed. "I have a family. I'm alone. You were just a thug." Judge Sterling interrupted him. "And thugs don't belong in society. They belong in cages." The verdict rose. "Bo Miller, I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison to be served at USP Leavenworth. You are not eligible for parole." The courtroom erupted in a low murmur. 22 years. It was a life sentence for a 32-year-old man. Miller's knees buckled, and the marshals had to hold him up. The judge turned to Clayton. "And you, Mr. Higgins, you created the culture that allowed a man like Miller to thrive. You chose profit over rights. I sentence you to 10 years. Furthermore, under the RICO statutes, the court orders the immediate forfeiture of all personal property acquired during his tenure as sheriff to pay restitution to the victims of his illegal seizures." Clayton rested his head on the table and closed his eyes. He was bankrupt. He was going to prison. It was over. The impact of the Washington verdict extended far beyond the courtroom. As part of the settlement, Daniel had orchestrated the official dissolution of the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department 3 weeks after the trial. Jurisdiction was transferred to the Georgia State Patrol until a new nonpartisan county police force could be established. The Washington Decree, as legal experts called it, set a precedent allowing federal oversight boards to audit the budgets of small police stations for predatory ticketing practices. But the most visible change came in Oak Haven. The speed trap on the Millers Creek Bridge was gone. The predatory signage was removed. The fear that had gripped the county's minority communities began to dissipate. The money from the class action lawsuit, millions of dollars seized from Clayton's corrupt coffers, went back to the people. Mechanics got their tools back. Families got their cars back. The students who had lost financial aid due to false drug charges had their records cleared and their tuition paid. Daniel didn't keep a penny. He donated his share of the settlement to the Oak Haven Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit organization created to provide free legal assistance to those who couldn't afford it. The final stretch. A year after the arrest, a silver Mercedes G-Wagon cruised down Route 27. The car was immaculate. The rear door lock had been replaced, the scratches polished out. The interior smelled of leather and pine. Daniel was driving. He was retired now. He had hung up his uniform 2 months earlier, ending a 35-year career with a ceremony at the Pentagon that brought tears to the Secretary of Defense's eyes. Now he was a civilian, just Daniel. In the passenger seat was David. He was wearing his dress uniform with a new medal pinned to his chest, an Army commendation for saving a squad mate during a training accident. "Are you okay, Dad?" David asked as they approached the Millers Creek Bridge. Daniel slowed the car. He looked at the spot on the shoulder where it had all happened. The gravel was still there. The oak tree was still there, but the predator was gone. "I'm fine, son," Daniel said, a small, peaceful smile touching his lips. He stopped the car for a moment. He rolled down the window. The heat was there, the humidity, the sound of the cicadas. "Why did we stop?" David asked. "Just checking the perimeter," Daniel said. He glanced at the empty spot where Miller's patrol car used to be hidden. Daniel reached into the center console and pulled out his phone. He looked at the wallpaper. It was a new one. Him and David fishing on the lake, laughing. He thought about the anger he'd felt that day, the rage. It was gone now. It had been replaced by the quiet satisfaction of justice served. He had used his power not to destroy, but to right the wrongs. He had fought a war on the Georgia highway and won without firing a shot. "You know," Daniel said, restarting the car, "Officer Miller asked me a question that day." "What did he ask?" "He asked whose car this was." Daniel laughed, the sound deep and resonant. He accelerated. The G-Wagon roared to life, its twin-turbo engine singing a song of freedom. And David asked. Daniel looked at the open road ahead, free of traps, free of tyrants. "And I told him," Daniel said, "it's mine." They drove off into the sunset, leaving the shadows of Oak Haven behind, driving toward a slightly brighter and a lot fairer future. And that's the incredible true story of how one arrogant congressman messed with the wrong man and brought down an entire corrupt system. It's a powerful reminder that while authority can be abused, true power lies in integrity, intelligence, and the courage to stand firm. Officer Miller believed his badge made him a king, but General Washington showed him that the law is the only true sovereign. Karma didn't just hit Miller, it crushed him with the full weight of the United States justice system. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new stories. What would you have done if you were the general? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.